Going the distance with local sports. This is the X Sports Network.
Here at Fields and Brown Barbershop, legacy means a lot. We're trying to fill big shoes left by my two uncles and my grandfather, where every haircut came with conversation and every customer left a little taller than when they walked in. The barbershop is about pride. It's about knowing your barber knows your name and your story. Come see us at Fields and Brown Barbershop, where tradition never goes out of style. 3 generations, 1 legacy, your barbershop.
Arctic Air keeps your home or business comfortable. For more than 20 years, we provided outstanding residential and commercial services through southern Middle Tennessee. Whether you need assistance with your heat, air conditioning, preventive maintenance, or anything in between, trust our reliable team to get the job done. We'll take the time to figure out your specific needs and recommend what we believe is right and best for your situation.
We've been using Arctic Air for over 15 years now. Their service is great, they're here when we need them, and their prices are competitive. They take the worry out of the heat and air so I don't have to.
Arctic Air. When you need us, we'll be there.
Financial advisor Scott Beasley knows time spent with family is everything. As a founder of Beasley Wealth Management, his mission is to give clients the freedom to enjoy time with family without the burden of financial concerns. A local of Lawrenceburg, Scott deeply values building relationships with clients, ensuring they make informed decisions concerning asset management, tax planning, and retirement planning. Offering a free initial consultation, Beasley Wealth Management helps clients pursue their aspirations with confidence. A local law firm respected throughout the state. Generations of clients have turned to Boston, Holt, and Durham since 1948. We assist individuals and businesses with their legal needs, including real estate, property closings, personal injury, employment discrimination, and family law. Our clients get the personal attention and convenience of a hometown law firm with the resources and ability to handle any case. Come see us at Boston, Holt, and Durham.
Going the distance with local sports. This is the X Sports Network.
I'd like to welcome everybody in here to the Mark My Words College Sports Show here on the X Sports Network. I'm your host, Michael Marks, and on this Monday, folks, it is going to be strictly football. There has been so much going on in the sports world over the last, give or take 96 hours, the last 3 or 4 days since Thanksgiving, so we got a lot to jump into, and we'll start with looking over rivalry week. I mean, what better thing to do? So we'll start with the ACC versus SEC games, because there are a ton of these. Didn't realize how many SEC teams had a rival in the ACC, but when you look at it, yeah, there are a ton. So first off, Georgia Tech. That one was on Friday afternoon. The Dogs take that one 16-9 to finish their season 11-1. Georgia Tech falls to 9-3, and boy, what a fall from grace it really was there for the Yellow Jackets. Just, I don't know if you want to call it unfortunate scheduling, but the cookie did not crumble the way of the Yellow Jackets to finish the year. You had such a good start. You were 8-0. Then you lose that NC State game. Well, you get back right somewhat against Boston College. You're 9-1. Yeah, you know your defense has some holes in it, but you feel like you can finish the season pretty, on a good note. You beat Pitt. You're in the ACC championship game. Well, you didn't beat Pitt. Then you didn't beat Georgia, and you went from the ACC maybe being a multi-bid league because you're so good to now the ACC is likely to. I mean, it's very realistic now that they don't even get a team in with how the final has scheduled out there. We'll look at those standings here in a moment. But yeah, just it was an ugly game. I mean, Gunnar Stockton threw for 70 yards. it wasn't a pretty game on either side. Combined 510 yards of offense from the two teams, 260 for Georgia, 250 for Georgia Tech. Surprising to see Georgia Tech rely more in the air than they did on the ground, but it was kind of a flip numbers. 3 yards through the air per attempt for Georgia. Nearly 7 for Georgia Tech, but then on the ground, almost 5 yards a rush for Georgia, 3 for Georgia Tech. Each team had a turnover, but it was 13-3 at half, and you really didn't see Georgia Tech's offense getting much going, and especially when they couldn't get in the end zone, it was going to be tough. But props to that Georgia defense. Did not let Jamal Haynes get going, did not let Eric Rivers get going. They made Georgia Tech's secondary guys try to make plays, and didn't work. Big game on the ground for Georgia. They ran the ball 50 times. Nate Frazier, 16 carries, 108 yards, no touchdowns. Josh McCray finally had a decent game, 13 carries, 43 yards, and then Gunnar Stockton, 15 carries for 42 yards. So Gunnar Stockton on the day, 112 yards of offense, a touchdown, and an interception. Not great for his Heisman hopes, but Georgia's going to Atlanta next week to play in the SEC championship game, and Georgia Tech's probably going to end up in the Citrus Bowl or something to that matter. We'll go to Saturday. Most of these games played early. We'll talk about the Battle of the Palmetto State, South Carolina and Clemson. That one, early season, we thought that could be for a potential playoff spot, and realistically, it was just if Clemson was going to win 7 games, because Clemson had already clinched a bowl game. South Carolina had clinched nothing at 3-7 or 4-7. Pardon. There were some sparks early in this one, by at least in the second quarter. Lenore Sellers put up a pretty great stat line through the air, all things considered. 381 yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 picks. Absolutely zero run game from South Carolina. 19 rushes, 41 yards. That is not good at all. Klubnik, 24, 39, 261, and a pick. Adam Randall gave you 102 yards and a touchdown on the ground. But you look, and Clemson's defense did exactly what they needed to do. It was for South Carolina to beat you through the air, and while Nick Harbor had 115 yards and a touchdown, and Vendravius Jacobs had 140 yards and a touchdown, that was the only touchdowns you gave up, and those were both on big plays in the second quarter. After that, your defense was lights out for 3 other quarters, and Clemson did exactly what they needed to get a win, and possibly some changes coming to South Carolina heading into next season. One that I did not see the outcome of this one happening whatsoever. Louisville absolutely destroys Kentucky 41-0. That one on Saturday morning on, I believe it was on the SEC network, so or the ACC network. So not a great look for the Wildcats as they finished the year 5-7. Had a chance to get the bowl eligibility. Cutter Boley, 13 of 26, 100 yards, no touchdowns, 2 picks. Definitely his worst game of the year. Dante Dowdell, 6 carries, 27 yards. Jason Patterson, 8 carries, 22 yards. It was no rushing from Kentucky's offense. 26 carries for 40 yards. Now, most of that is attributed to the fact that Louisville sacked Cutter Boley 6 times. But then you look on the other side. Miller Moss, not necessarily efficient. 12 carries or 12 for 20 for 182 yards and 3 touchdowns through the air. But it was a back to the ground game for Louisville. Didn't have any of their guys from earlier in the season, but Braxton Jennings, 20 carries, 113 yards. Sean Boykins, 22 carries, 101 yards and a touchdown. And neither of those guys had a rush of over 20 yards. So that was just a continuing 5 yards a carry. And listen, to go 50 rushes for 258 yards and 2 touchdowns against your rival when you threw for 3 touchdowns, and there was no Chris Bell in this game for Louisville. There was, they were missing most of their weapons on offense, and maybe the best their offense looked all year. I mean, it was the only time they put up over 40 against the Power 4 opponent. They got to 40 against Bowling Green and 51 against Eastern Kentucky. So, boy, it seems that Louisville maybe gotten some swagger right before the end of the regular season, and that's perfect for them, because that was a team that was in jeopardy of being 7-1 and falling to their last 4 games going 7-5. So yeah, 1-0, 2-0, 3-0, 4-0, 4-1, 5-1, 6-1, 7-1. So yeah, they were 7-1 going into that Cal game a couple weeks ago. Lose that, you lose a close one to Clemson. You get blown out by SMU. There's nothing pointing toward a positive trend right there, and they don't lose their last 4 games. Get a big win over Kentucky. Good win for Louisville, and because it didn't look good. Jeff Brom signed that extension, so he wouldn't go anywhere else, and then they stopped winning football games. And as you know, 3 losses in a row. It's some places this season that's been a fireable offense. We've seen James Franklin get let go. I don't think Florida was on a 3-game lose streak when they let Billy Napier go, but it was definitely nearing that. And speaking of the Gators and the Noles did battle on Saturday afternoon, and it's disappointing that this has turned into an afternoon game and not a night game, but neither team had much to go for. Again, Florida wasn't going to make a bowl game, but they could prevent Florida State from doing that, and they did. Florida State went 0-5 away from home this year. Florida puts up 40. It was the first time they had reached 40 against a non-FCS opponent, and that was week 1 against Long Island. So, Florida's offense had struggled. And this isn't the first time that this year that they've had a game where they just turn around and hand it to Jaden Ball. That's been their mantra really most of the year. It was just turn around and let Jaden Ball carry it as many times as he could. And it was by far his best game of the season on Saturday. It wasn't a DJ Lagway, slinging the rock. It was Jaden Ball, 38 carries for 266 yards. To put that in perspective, Florida State as a team had 37 carries for 161 yards. And it wasn't like Ball broke off, 260 rushing yards. That dude had to break off 22 yards as longest rush. That is just a consistent pounding the rock. I mean, that's nearly 7 yards a carry. Just insane. I mean, I'm not sure, if that's the most rushing yards an SEC guys had this year. We had Ahmad Hardy had that 300-yard game. But, man, just to dominate on the ground that well, force a couple Florida State turnovers. I mean, this is Florida State is a perfect example of a team that peaked in week 1. They got ready for that Alabama game. They got that win. And then after that, it seemed that nothing else on their schedule mattered. They showed some fight against Miami, Pitt, Virginia, but we didn't really know how good or bad those teams were then. You have a loss to Stanford. You blow out Wake Forest, and those happened in back-to-back weeks. And then you lose to Clemson. I mean, this Florida State team, when you got them away from home, was a different animal, and not in a good way. Went 5-2 at home, 0-5 away from Doak Walker Stadium. They're going to have to, or Doak Campbell Stadium. They're going to have to fix that next year. Looking around the rest of the ACC, we had a game that had some championship applications, at least in the ACC. SMU traveling out west to face Cal. We've seen Cal give some teams a run for their money this year, and they did it once again, getting the win over SMU, 38-35. And real quick, just take a look at some of the teams in the ACC this year, all with the same record. Clemson at 7-5. Dabo almost got fired. I mean, it was realistic that he probably should have. Duke at 7-5. They're going to the ACC championship game. Cal at 7-5 fired their head coach, and then NC State at 7-5. I mean, that's kind of just what Dave Doran's going to get you. He's going to get you 7-5 every year. But the fact that those 3 teams, 7-5, are in a completely different realm is just hilarious. And I think we're going to start seeing a conversation start about how there's too many teams in conferences, because you look, and every year there's a team or two that plays the bottom 6 teams in their conference, and then a couple of the 3 there in the middle. Right now Duke is in the ACC championship game. Let's look at that conference schedule. They went 6-2. Okay, they played NC State, who is also a 7-5 team. They beat Syracuse, who is bad. They beat Cal, who I still don't think is very good. They beat Clemson, who again, you beat North Carolina, not very good. You beat Wake Forest. That was actually a really nice win on Saturday. And now you get a rematch, or a matchup with Virginia, one that you actually got to see a couple weeks ago, and Virginia dominated them. I think we'll probably see more of the same, but knowing how the ACC works things out, Duke's going to win this game and mess some things up for a lot of teams. Also in the ACC, Miami and Pitt was probably the most hyped up game in the conference this weekend, and boy, you're going to see a trend of games that were supposed to be huge this weekend just ended up being, or some of them ended up being duds. Miami 38, Pitt 7. just an all-around bad game from Pitt, and Miami played almost perfect. I mean, Carson Beck, 23 of 29, 267, 3 touchdowns, and a pick. That is an average Carson Beck game. That's what you're going to get for him. Mason Heinschel, 22 of 32, 199 yards, a touchdown, and a pick. You saw the playing without Desmond Reed in this game. You didn't see it last week against Georgia Tech. You did see it tonight, or this Saturday. Ja'Carrion Turner, 10 carries, 37 yards. There was just nothing on the ground. 21 carries, 30 yards. Miami, 40 carries, 140 yards. You got 82 from Gerard Pringle, another 30 from Mark Fletcher, 30 from Malachi Toney, who also had 126 yards through the air and a touchdown. C.J. Daniels made some big plays. This was just domination from start to finish. All the way around, really, for Miami. Their offense looked great. Their defense looked great. Pitt did get that touchdown there in the second quarter, but again, it was a 6-yard a 6-yard pass to Justin Holmes. I mean, it was not like anything crazy had happened there. Is Miami gonna make the playoff now? I mean, that's kind of the discussion coming out of this. I'm not sure, but tomorrow night on ESPN around 7 o'clock, or not sure if it's 7 or 8 Eastern, but somewhere in that, in that time range, we're going to get a lot of stuff figured out. Because with conference championship weekend, the only teams that are really going to move are those teams playing in those games. So I think right now the playoff rankings we're going to see tomorrow night are probably going to be pretty close to the final, give or take. Maybe Alabama moves up a spot if they beat Georgia, or Georgia moves down a couple spots if they lose, something like that. It's not going to be anything like, I don't think there's a scenario where like Virginia blows out Duke and jumps a bunch of teams into the top 10. It's not going to be something like that, or you're not going to see Alabama beat Georgia by 2 touchdowns and then Georgia completely fall out of the rankings. It's nothing like that's going to happen. So I think that Saturday or Tuesday, tomorrow night, we're probably going to have a pretty good indicator of what the final playoff is going to look like. We'll talk about that on Wednesday a little bit, but Wednesday's episode is going to be covering a lot of basketball because we had a bunch of big games last week with Feast Week. We'll get back onto the football track into the Big 12. Not a bunch of huge games this week in the Big 12, as most of that conference has really already been figured out. and that's kind of what does suck with the last couple of weeks of the season. If you're not playing in a rivalry game and you're not fighting for a conference championship, there's not a whole lot of enthusiasm behind these last week's games. But we had a good one on Black Friday. Arizona getting the big win over Arizona State, 23-7. That defense showed up big time. Was not a good game from Jeff Sims, threw 3 picks. Had a fumble. 4 turnovers from your starting quarterback. That's going to lose you a lot of games. Noah Fafita, played all right, 286 yards and a touchdown. Kendrick Cassano had a rushing touchdown. Ismail Mahdi had 53 rushing yards. Not a game with a ton of huge numbers. 7 catches, 95 yards for Chris Hudson for Arizona, but just an all-around great win and huge defensively for Arizona's defense that didn't do much. They didn't get a sack. They had 2 tackles for loss, but they forced a fumble and they forced 3 interceptions. That makes it hard for a team that I didn't think was going to pass the ball much in the first place. It made them completely rely on the run game, but it was a lot of control in the game for Arizona. They came out and pretty much dominated the second half. It was a good defensive matchup, but Arizona prevailed there at the end. One that I did not see getting as one-sided as it was TCU and Cincinnati. TCU was a team that a couple of weeks ago we were talking about for the college football playoff, as it is with a lot of teams. Man, they went to Fort Worth and got boat raced, 45-23. Josh Hoover, by far his best game of the year, 19-22, 306 yards, 4 touchdowns. That's awesome. When you have more touchdowns and incompletions, you're doing good things. And then in the running game, Jeremy Payne. That's not their number one guy throughout the year. He's not Kavorian Barnes, who had led the team in rushing for most of the season, or at least the early part of the season before he started battling some injuries. And then Jeremy Payne goes 26 carries, 176 yards, and 2 touchdowns. That's really good. That's 7 yards a carry, again. Just all around, and a hair under, it's probably 6.8 or somewhere around there, but really impressive game for TCU. Cincinnati's offense was off, and that's why they're 7-5. I mean, it's crazy that this team quite literally went from an unranked team to a really good record, and then they were surprisingly didn't get higher than 17. And this is a team that was they were a 7-1 team that was ranked 17th. Maybe you would get that win over Utah, you jump into like the top 10, but you you closed the season with 4 straight losses: a loss to Utah, a loss to Arizona, a loss to BYU, and a loss to TCU, teams that were, quite frankly, all better than you this year. And having that injury to Evan Pryor around that time really hurt things, because 20 carries, 120 yards, that's not what they want to do, because they got down 21-7 after the first quarter, and it was 31-17 going into halftime. They had to throw the ball, and Sorsby got to nearly 300 yards, but their bread and butter was keeping games close and running the ball. And once Pryor went out, it's hard for Sorsby and Walker to keep up that production. And we saw their offense struggle a little bit. I think still a great year for the Bearcats, and definitely something to build on next year. But you're gonna have to look elsewhere, because Sorsby, he's a junior, might come back, I'm not sure if he will. Twee Walker, senior, he's gone. Evan Pryor, senior, he's gone. Maybe you could get some of these guys back, but right now your leading rusher coming back is Manny Covey, a sophomore that got 17 touches this year. So definitely something to work on there for Satterfield and his team. But listen, I think they, despite having that fall off at the end of the year, I think they exceeded expectations. They were 7-1 at one point and then got injured. Sometimes that happens to teams. This wasn't a team that was 7-1 and then completely fell apart or anything. It's kind of similar to what happened with Miami. They got to 7-1, had some injury troubles, and limped to the end of the finish line. But they're both going to a bowl game, and I think both will probably prosper. Who knows? Heading over to the Big Ten, a game on Friday, and boy, Iowa, they learned how to put up some points this year. I will give them that. The Hawkeyes get a win over their rival Nebraska, and Kirk Ferentz continues to own them. 40-16 your final. Now Nebraska, another team that finished 7-5, was a team that kind of limped to the finish line once Rayola got hurt. TJ Lateef was your guy, and he went 9 for 24 for 69 yards. Now, Emmett Johnson went off in the first half. Don't have his exact first half stats here, but on the game went 29 carries for 217 yards and a touchdown. That's impressive. I mean, this was a 10-10 game after the first quarter. It was 24-16 going into halftime. I thought we had a shootout on our hands between Iowa and Nebraska. Great game from Mark Gronowski. Did what he needed to do through the air. 9 of 16, 166 yards and a touchdown. On the ground, went 13 carries for 64 yards and 2 touchdowns, as did Kamari Moulton, 18 carries, 93 yards, and 2 touchdowns as well. Great game. Nebraska had some turnover issues, and they have since Lateef's taken over. They only ended up having 1 fumble, but there were a couple of other free balls in that game, I do remember. And again, huge win for Iowa to go on the road and win at Nebraska. And where do the Cornhuskers go looking forward? Because Emmett Johnson's a junior. He could probably come back, but I think he's probably going to make a lot of money in the NFL in the draft, and especially from the season he had. I mean, you look at his 1,400 yards and 12 touchdowns on 6 yards a carry in the Big Ten is really, really impressive, no matter who you played in the conference. Good win for Iowa. They get to 8-4 on the season. Should have a pretty good bowl game sitting ahead of them. Citrus Bowl, something like that. Ohio State and Michigan. I'd say one of the less hype of these games. Last year had it would be so funny if Ohio State lost to a bad Michigan team, ha ha ha. And the years before that, it was Michigan's better. They might win again, and they did for a couple of years. And well, Ohio State got back right. 27-9, their win right there. Perfect regular season, and we'd like to say they didn't play anybody, but the 2 times they played somebody, the couple of times they played somebody, they other than that Texas game, because that Texas game was just really ugly. That game against Illinois on the road against a ranked team, and at Michigan on the road, a ranked team, they won both those games by 18 points, and they were games where they didn't look perfect from the start, but by the end of the game, they had completely dominated it. Michigan came out, first drive, had that big run. I believe it was Marshall, maybe broke off a long one, got in the field goal range, field goal, boom, you're up 3-0. Then Julian saying, third play of the drive, pick. Michigan in good field goal position. and they have to settle for 3 again. That was where Michigan lost the game. Ohio State's given up, 6 points a game, 5 points a game this season? I mean, it's unreal. They only gave up double digits to, two teams, UCLA, Purdue, Penn State, Illinois. I mean, nobody got to 20. Illinois scored the most at 16. So you're going to have to get in the end zone. They didn't take enough urgency. Bo Jackson dominated on the ground, 22 carries, 117 yards. Carnell Tate made some big catches. Jeremiah Smith made some big catches. Julian Sand looked really efficient, probably punched his ticket to New York, and man, it is scary what that kid's going to be able to do next year. Just a sophomore, I believe he is coming back. There are some sophomores that can get drafted. I'm not exactly sure what the draft eligibility rules are 100% and what his age is. Jordan Marshall, 7 carries, 61 yards. Brian Kuzdal, 11 for 38. Wasn't going to be a great game on the ground for Michigan. They tried. You were going to need a big game from McGauley, or maybe hit Marshall or Kuzdal out of the backfield. Maybe, Jordan Marsh. Jordan Marsh didn't touch the ball in this game. How does that happen? I get he's a freshman, but one of your best playmakers on the outside doesn't touch the ball? I mean, look at Michigan's receiving core. Andrew Marsh, Donovan McGauley, Samaj Morgan. Now, Morgan has dealt with some injuries this year, but McGauley and Marsh should have been able to somewhat get it going. Not one bit. And it wasn't like Ohio State's defense, again, they weren't in the backfield a lot. 1 sack, 3 tackles for loss. They were going to make Michigan run the ball right down the middle, and it was going to be 1 yard at a time. They handled it. Really, after Ohio State got that second touchdown in the second quarter and went up, I believe it was 17-9 at the time. Michigan cut it to 1, but then Ohio State goes down the field and scores right before halftime. That kind of felt like the end for me. I get Ohio State went out and punted the first drive of the second half, but then Michigan punted it right back to them. Ohio State touchdown, 24-9. There was no reason to watch the second half of that one, and really most of those morning games kind of stunk. Kentucky was killing Louisville. Clemson, South Carolina, nobody wants to watch that. Miami destroying Pitt. You got Ohio State destroying Michigan. Morning slot was a lot of big-time wins, we'll say that. Now, as we get into the afternoon slot with some of these games, Oregon and Washington was a pretty good game. I think we're starting to see a Dante Moore reach a new level heading into the playoffs because Oregon, again, won't be in the conference championship game, smartly enough, but they'll have time to rest their team, get things ready, and make sure that they don't have what happened to them last year in the playoffs. Unfortunately, they got to run into the buzzsaw named Ohio State. What are they going to do this year? They're not going to be a top 4 seed. They're not going to get a bye. They might get ranked as high as 6. It's probably as high as I would go. I'm not exactly sure where they exactly sit right now. I think they're at 7. I think the only thing that we see happen is they jump Ole Miss. Curious to see how far Ole Miss drops in the playoff as we get to those rankings that'll be coming up. These stats real quick: 26-14 win for Oregon at Washington. Love those Oregon jerseys that they wore in the game. It was the gold helmets with the duck logo on the shoulder. Those are by far my favorite Oregon uniforms. Dante Moore, 20 of 29, 286 yards, a touchdown. Not a whole lot of anything going on the ground. You got a rushing touchdown from Dante Moore, but as a team, 40 for 106. That's 2.5 yards a carry. Not great on the ground, but they had enough going through the air that they didn't really need much. But Oregon's defense forced a ton of mistakes for DeMond Williams, 15 of 30, 2 touchdowns, 2 picks, only 130 yards of offense. We got to see a lot of Adam Muhammad. Jonah Coleman went down, only 9 carries, 22 yards for him. Denzel Boston, 4 catches, 25 yards, had those 2 touchdowns, but I mean, he was a non-factor pretty much until you got to the red zone. So for Washington, they finished the season 8-4. On the better end of 8-4 teams, you look at their losses. I mean, number 1 team in the country, Ohio State. Then you lose to Michigan, who is a very good team. I think we need to give Michigan some credit. Yeah, they have that weird loss to Washington Wisconsin a couple weeks ago, and then Oregon, Oregon, Michigan, Ohio State. Oh wow, look, that's 3 of the top 4 teams in the conference that you had to play, and I believe actually all of them came to you. You had to go travel to Michigan, but for the most part, those teams came to you. So A team that goes 6-0 at home one year loses 2 games at home the next. In the Big 12 once more, Northwestern Illinois. The weather in this one made it a blast. It was a blizzard before the games, so to speak. The entire Midwest got covered in snow, at least around the Great Lakes area, over the weekend. And it was a game that started out as a snow game, didn't finish necessarily as much of one. They got most of the field cleared off by then. But a win for Illinois, and was definitely getting a bit testy down the stretch there. They're one of those teams that started the year ranked in the top 25. We'll get to some of those teams in a minute that had one bad loss, and it was that game against Illinois or against Indiana, where they got destroyed 63-10. You kind of forgot about them after that, and they just kind of floated around. Oh, you get a win here against USC, you lose here to Ohio State. They needed a big win to finish the season, and they got it. 20-13 win over Northwestern at home. Mike Scott got 2 big interceptions late in that game on Preston Stone. You didn't have Komolafe on the ground for Northwestern, so that limited your rushing attack. Your passing game was all right with Elgin the second with 99 yards and a touchdown. But you had some fumbles. You didn't get a lot of sacks or tackles for loss, so Illinois kind of just had to weather the storm, so to speak. Luke Altmaier, 10 of 15, 136 yards. This was going to be a game won on the ground. Khalil Valentine, 14 carries for 74 yards. That's 5 yards a carry. That's pretty good. Aiden Lawfrey, 9 carries for 37 yards. Caden Fagan, 5 carries, 13 yards, and a touchdown. Luke Altmaier, technically 7 rushes for minus 2 yards. One of those, some of those yards kind of skewed by a sack, but Illinois did what they needed to do, and they finished 8-4. Probably another pretty good bowl game coming up for the Illini. As you're going to see this year, there's a lot of teams that are 10-2, and there's a lot of teams that are 8-4. So there's not a whole lot of 9-3s. There's not a whole lot of 11-1s. But teams that are in that 11-1 range and those 10-2 ranges are really good. Talking about one of those teams with 11 wins now, number 7 Ole Miss taking down Mississippi State 38-19. That one early on Friday morning. One, disappointing that game's not on Thanksgiving night anymore. I mean, that was my favorite thing. Got to go over to my grandparents for Thanksgiving, eat lunch, take a nap, watch some NFL games throughout the day, and then that night you go home and you watch the Egg Bowl. That was always kind of a fun thing to do. They've moved it to Friday the past couple of years. Again, it's kind of with the whole the NFL kind of owns Thanksgiving, not college football. We had one decent game on Thanksgiving, but primarily, the NFL owns Thanksgiving, and we respect that. And we got a ton of good football on Black Friday. Stats in this game looked great. Ole Miss rocking those powder blues on the road. Chambliss went 23 of 34, 359 and 4 touchdowns. Quan Lacey $143 and a touchdown on the ground. Chambliss added another 25 yards, so he finished around the 385-yard range. Deuce Alexander 94 yards and a touchdown. Harrison Wallace 72 yards and a touchdown. Deshaun Stribling had 2 touchdowns. and the only touchdowns that Mississippi State scored were 2 touchdowns on the ground by Camario Taylor, who ended up having to play this whole game. Didn't look bad, but actually, I think a pretty bright spot for Mississippi State. You give this kid a full offseason, learning that passing system and that system that Jeff Levy's got set up. The kid looks pretty good. 6'4", 230-pound freshman out of Macon, Mississippi. Camario Taylor could be a name to watch out for, and maybe he hits the portal and goes elsewhere. I mean, he had 20 carries, 173 yards, and 2 touchdowns. I mean, that sounds like a Clark Lee or Brent Key, one of those type of offenses. That would be their weapon, right there. But obviously, most of the attention on this game was towards Ole Miss head coach Lane Kiffin, who was going to make a decision after this game. You didn't know if it was going to be that night, the next morning, the next night, the next morning. This drug out all the way into Sunday from Friday afternoon. And we'll talk more about that as we get to it. But a great win for Ole Miss, 11-1, and now they have to get ready for the playoffs. Don't have to go to the SEC championship game. I think that was something that probably played a pretty big factor there at the end, is why it went to Saturday night, because, again, that Iron Bowl went down to the wire, and we'll get to that in a minute, that if Alabama won, Ole Miss wasn't going to be in the SEC championship game. If Auburn did, Ole Miss was going to be in the SEC championship game. A game on Friday night that Texas A&M did not look interested in one bit. They fall to Texas 27-17, a big top 5 win for the Longhorns. And you know what? A great way to cap a 9-3 season. They're probably not going to make the playoffs. We'll see how much the committee gives them a love for that win over A&M. But again, I don't think you can put a 9-3 SEC team over right now a 1-loss BYU, a 2-loss Utah, a 2-loss Miami, or a 2-loss Vandy. I think all those teams right now have the slight edge. But listen, Texas, a lot of people sold stock in them a couple weeks into the season. Arch didn't look good. But yeah, he's a junior. He should have played better coming into these games. He didn't. He hadn't played much. I mean, you look at the time he got to play last year, it was against teams like ULM. It wasn't against the Oklahomas, which he looked really good against when he played them. He went. It was at home, but played one of the top 2 or 3 best teams in the country and handled business. You're down 10-3 at halftime, and you absolutely dominated the second half, outscoring them 24 to 7. Marcel Reed, 180 yards, 2 interceptions. I think that this game probably ended his Heisman hopes. Concepcion Craver didn't get anything going. Arch, 179 yards and a touchdown. Wisner was huge in this game, 155 yards on the ground. Arch had 53 yards, added a touchdown in, as did Nick Townsend. I think it's cool to see a freshman get a touchdown in a big game like this, especially a kid from Houston, which is actually pretty close to College Station. Ryan Wingo had the 29-yard touchdown. Jack Indry's 93 yards. I tell you, if you're a tight end, I want to go to Texas, man. I mean, you look at what they did last year with why can't I think of his name now? He's on the Titans now, Helms. He's been good. Nick Townsend got that rushing touchdown. Jack Indry's was their leading receiver in this game. Leona LaFau had a great game, 11 tackles. But again, wasn't a whole lot of in the backfield. Texas A&M had a lot of tackles for loss, but not a whole lot of sacks. This is a game where Texas just dominated on the ground, and A&M really had no answer. I mean, you go look at some of the team stats, and Texas outgained them by 60 yards. Didn't outpass them, but that was a 1-yard difference. Outran you by 60 yards. Got 2 more yards of carry. Had less penalties. Didn't turn the ball over. Or a little better on third down. That wins you football games. And for Texas, that's a huge win for them because you're 9-3. You built a ton of momentum for next year. You get some of those young guys because Texas was a young team at many spots. You get some of those guys to come back. And, what are we looking at for Texas next year? A team that I feel like maybe isn't getting talked about very much for next year, but I assume Arch will be back. I assume that most of their offensive weapons are going to be back. Because I think they're a little salty about how this year went. Texas was the preseason number 1. You lose week 1. You don't look good. You lose, week 5, I think it was, to Florida. You have that upset loss, and now you're scratching your head. You don't know what happened. Now you've finished the year 9-3. Your losses were to the number 1 team in the country on the road. I guess they're the third. They'll probably be third on those rankings tomorrow night. Number 3 team in the country on the road. And to Florida. Listen, every team has a bad game every year. That one game that you just don't want to talk about for the remainder of the season. Every team has it. That was Texas's. And listen, that Florida team hadn't given up hope yet. That was a completely different mindset of a team. Props to Texas. I think this is one of the more... I get with preseason number 1 expectations, it doesn't look, but I think this is actually a pretty impressive coaching job by Sark because once you started watching the team, you realized that there was no mesh in that team going into the season. They didn't know each other. They didn't know what they were going to do. Not a great look, but they got it fixed. Talking about the other new-ish team in the SEC, Oklahoma, who had a big final game against LSU, and boy, was it defense. Michael Van Buren, 14 of 25, 96 yards and a touchdown and a pick, added 33 yards on the ground. That one touchdown that he scored in the third quarter was that pass to Xavier Thomas was the only touchdown that LSU scored. They got a couple more field goals and actually had the lead late in the game, but John Mateer had a yardage-wise his best game of the season. Actually, not sure if that's 100% right. He had 392 in week 1 against Illinois State, but hadn't reached 300 since August. and it's December 1st today, but it's still November then. Listen, you start the season and end the season on some of your better games. I think it's a good look going forward. 318 yards, 2 touchdowns. Did have the 3 picks. But again, Harold Perkins, A.J. Halsey, D.J. Pickett, the guy you threw those to, those are very good defenders. He didn't have much on the ground, only 27 yards. Satania had that 58-yard touchdown on the little screen there at the end of the game. Or actually, I believe it was Deion Burks that had that last touchdown there at the end of the game. But that was huge. Oklahoma went from for a good part of that game, oh my gosh, are we going to win? Are we going to lose to LSU? Which wouldn't have been a terrible loss, but wouldn't have been good at all. A team that has already benched their quarterback for the year. But Oklahoma gets to win 17-13. They're probably in the playoffs. A little confusing with how the rankings will look. The final rankings will look on Sunday when it comes down to Oklahoma and Alabama. Because if Alabama beats Georgia, you gotta jump Oklahoma, right? And then, is Oklahoma ranked higher than Notre Dame still? Neither of them have a conference championship game going. Looking forward. Do you look at a 4-point win at home over LSU versus a 29-point win on the road versus Stanford? How do you look at those? I think these rankings on Tuesday are actually going to be very important. And then, we'll talk about the games on Friday, but games this weekend have, obviously, I think for the most part, actually, the conference championship games, at least for the Power 4, kind of boring. Rematch in the Big 12, rematch in the SEC, the least anticipated 1 versus 2 in the Big 10, and then a 7-5 team versus Virginia in the ACC. But those other games still got some fire to them. And, hey, we still got games here to talk about. Vandy goes to Knoxville and just drums Tennessee 45-24. Big win for Vanderbilt. They've in the season 10-2, getting their first 10-win season ever. They had reached their first 9-win season last week, first one since the World War I. I mean, they're doing things they've never done before. Diego Pavia is breaking passing records that are 45 years old. Vandy walked into Knoxville and took it over, so to speak. At least with their play on the field, wasn't there, so I didn't see the crowd. But there's a lot of black, but it was cold in Knoxville, so there's obviously going to be a lot of black coats in the stands. So that's judging a Tennessee Vandy game in November is kind of hard when it comes to that. But I think Vandy's done a great job of growing their fan base over the past couple of years. Their games are almost all, at this point, sold out. And it's not just to go to Nashville and have a nice weekend and get an easy win. No, it's to watch a good football team that may have the Heisman Trophy winner as their quarterback. Pavia wasn't his best game through the air. 18 of 28, 268, 2 first-half interceptions. But, man, on the ground, 20 carries, 165 yards, and a touchdown. Tennessee had no answer for him or Cedric Alexander, who goes 10 carries for 115 yards and 3 touchdowns for the Austin, Texas native, who, if they can get him to come back next year, he is going to be huge for Vanderbilt. It was the first time he went over 100 yards rushing in a game this year. And I believe it was probably one of the first times he went over 10 carries in a game this year. Had a couple of games like that, but for the most part was like a 6 to 8 carry game guy. Pavia was getting the bulk of the carries. But you get Alexander involved in there, that rushing attack. 37 rushes for 310 yards and 5 touchdowns. Versus the other side, 31 rushes, 83 yards, and 2 touchdowns. There's a big difference there. Aguilar looked a bit off, which has kind of become a theme here at the end of the season. 66% completion percentage. Brazel had the long touchdown grab. Ethan Davis was consistently pretty good throughout the entire game. Mike Matthews came to Tennessee after the season and asked for more money and then dropped a walk-in touchdown that may have had some impact on the outcome of this game. Radarius Jackson made a great catch. Looking at Vanderbilt, though, I don't know if there's a better 1-2 punch on the outside with speed, with hands, with agility than Junior Sherrill and Trey Richardson. Eli Stowers gives you the most versatile tight end in the country. You got Pavia, Alexander, Young. Those three are great at running the ball. Pavia can get it to him. And Vanderbilt's defense slowed down a Tennessee team that I don't think it scored below, 30 points all season? 45, 72, 41, 56, 41, 34, 20, 56, 27, 42, 31, 24. That was Tennessee's second lowest scoring total of the season. And the other one was Alabama. So I think that's a good look for Vanderbilt. I think it was a big win, which, if you look, we did a show a couple weeks ago talking about what some teams would need to do to get in the playoff. Well, let's look at the one that I made for Vanderbilt and see how many of those happened and, how much that helps them. Well, beat Kentucky. They did that. Beat Tennessee. They did that convincingly, too. Cincinnati beats BYU. That didn't happen. Tennessee beats Florida, which did happen. The more convincing, the better. Was pretty convincing, but I don't know if the AP or the playoffs moved Tennessee up enough and to change that look of that Vandy game. You needed Oregon to beat USC, which happened. You needed Oklahoma to lose to either Missouri or LSU, which unfortunately didn't happen, which I think was probably the biggest one for you. Georgia beats Georgia Tech, which happened. Ohio State beats Michigan, which happens. And then Miami lose to Pitt, which didn't happen. I thought that Vandy would jump Miami with a ranked win over Tennessee, but with Pitt getting that win over Georgia Tech, and now that Miami win being a win over a ranked Pitt, which will probably drop to unranked after the game, it's tough. I really do think that there's one spot left realistically for Vanderbilt or Miami. Because I think that, and now if BYU wins, the Big 12 is going to get two teams in, and that's going to mess some things up for the SEC. Probably knock Notre Dame out. If you're looking at some of those teams in the back end of the 12-team playoff. And also over the weekend, we got an update from Rivals Recruiting that said that Jared Curtis, the 5-star quarterback, number 1 ranked quarterback in the country, or up there. Nashville kid was committed to Georgia, considering a flip to Vanderbilt. He was at College Game Day a couple weeks ago when they had Missouri in town, and said that he just wanted to visit College Game Day, that there was nothing really there between him and Vanderbilt recruiting-wise. But, Vanderbilt was only one game behind Georgia overall. And that's because they had a quarterback with some swag. I think Jared Curtis might be that guy. Could be a big development coming for Vandy, and obviously Clark Lee re-signs, his extension on Friday last Friday. I think that built a ton of momentum for Saturday, and it was a great win for Vanderbilt. And now, probably the biggest game that happens this last week of the regular season. It's the Iron Bowl. It's Alabama. It's Auburn. It's always a good game. You can throw the records out the door, throw the rankings out the door, throw the players out the door. It is Alabama and Auburn. It's always going to be a great game. Auburn has struggled this year. They've had their ups. That win at Baylor, I think, to begin the season looked really good. I think by the end of the season, looked like another win. Back and forth affair, really, the entire time. And, then you look at they're at the end, last minute and a half of the game, 2 minutes of the game. Ty Simpson, Isaiah Horton gives Alabama the lead. A big late-time touchdown. Auburn gets the ball back, about 2.5 minutes remaining. And, interim coach DJ Durkin, a defensive guy's got to lead his guys down the field. A team that has been up and down all season. Just mentioned it. They have close losses to Oklahoma, who's in the playoff, to Georgia, who's in the playoff, I don't believe they actually played Texas A&M. But, again, you kind of get the gist of it there. Great finish. Another one that's going to go down in the record books there. Ty Simpson, 122 yards, 3 touchdowns. Not his greatest game, but I think Jam looked good on the ground for the first time in a while, really since that Vandy game. I think the team as a whole looked really good on the ground. 160 yards on, right over 35, 40 carries. That's better. And Isaiah Horton, the hat trick, obviously, the 3 touchdowns on 5 catches, had a great game. Ashton Daniels, I think, had a great game for Auburn. Had 108 yards on the ground, 259 through the air. Goes for over 360 yards, a touchdown, a pick. Jeremiah Cobb got in the end zone. Simmons. That kid came out of nowhere. Hadn't really heard much of him all season, and then goes for 144 yards and a touchdown. And it felt like there at the end, if Auburn needed a big play, you're going to him, of all people. And that's not discrediting him or anybody else on Auburn's football team. But, I mean, this is a guy that had 400 yards on the season, and 150 of them came in that game. Felt strange. Cam Coleman made some big plays. Eric Singleton was really a non-factor in this game, and I think Alabama's defense is to credit for that. But the fumble. Auburn's got it. They're driving. It's they're moving it down the field, and they got some momentum. There's fumbles, there's penalties, there's incompletions. And now it is 2nd down and 5. Ashton Daniels runs out of bounds. 13-yard gain. Now you're at the 27. Field goal range. You needed a touchdown, but you're in field goal range, and you have 33 seconds, so that's realistically 3 plays. You have, I think, one timeout left. So the middle of the field's open. Daniels hits an out route to Cam Coleman. Caught it. Gained 7 yards. Thing got popped on got a helmet right on that arm of his. Ball came out. Hubbard recovers, and Alabama gets the ball back. Actually, I believe Auburn had all their timeouts at that time, and were able to get the ball back there with 10 seconds. But again, ran out of time there at the end. But another great Iron Bowl, and Auburn not making a bowl game 5-7 were allowed to. Maybe it was good that they lost that game. They were able to go ahead and get involved in the coaching search. Didn't have to worry about playing an extra game this year. I know some of those guys probably wanted it, but realistically, you gotta look to the future. I think in that instance, some of the Group of 5 games, Navy takes down Memphis. That one was our Thursday game, 28-17. North Texas, a big win over Temple, 52-25. Charlotte falls to Tulane, 27-0. San Diego State falls to New Mexico, 23-17. And then James Madison dominating Coastal Carolina, 59-10. So that does it for the games of the weekend. We've got a loaded coaching carousel now, guys, because, boy, it started on Tuesday afternoon with Eric Morris, and it just keeps getting better. So we'll take a look at it. It's just the stuff that's happened over the weekend. First things first, LSU is going to pay Brian Kelly the full 53, 54, north of $50 million. Kelly is obviously struggling looking for a job because not the most likable guy in the world. So he's going to get the $54 million. He's going to go probably sit on the couch at home because I'm not even sure if ESPN would want to bring him on as a desk analyst for a couple of seasons until he gets a new job. James Franklin goes to Virginia Tech. That happened last week. Jim Mora goes from UConn to Colorado State. Nick Saban said on the Pat McAfee show, why the heck would he do that? Not sure. But I guess he thought UConn had kind of sealined out, and maybe he wanted to head back west to Colorado. Really not sure about that one at all. Eric Morris, the first of the big-time jobs taken, is going to go from North Texas to Oklahoma State. Great hire, because he's got a freshman running back that's really good in Caleb Hawkins and a freshman quarterback that's really good in Drew Mestamaker. Not sure if Morris is going to finish the season with his team. That's kind of a big topic right now. Let's see what they got going on, actually. Let me see if I can find something real quick here. So not sure actually if Morris is going to stay through a possible playoff run or not, but North Texas is in the American Conference Championship game, but I think that set up Oklahoma State for a solid future for a while. We've seen Morris's offense. We've seen some of the quarterbacks he's developed over his time. I think it's a great hire for Oklahoma State because they've produced some great quarterbacks, and hopefully, with Morris, they're going to produce a ton more. And I think bringing a new talented coach into the Big 12 is just good for more competition. It was weird seeing Oklahoma State kind of suck the past couple of years. I like watching an Oklahoma State upset Iowa State on a Saturday afternoon. Stuff like that's fun. Jamarcus Shepard going from Alabama as their co-offensive coordinator to Oregon State. It's stability. Oregon State was down in the dumps. obviously got the tie for the Pac-12 championship, but if you watch Oregon State and Washington State at all this season, you know that Washington State was by far the better team. And Oregon State wants to change that, while it's still the Pac-2. And Jamarcus Shepard is a great recruiter. It's a guy that can bring talent in. And now he's going to compete with Dan Lanning up in the Pacific Northwest for a bunch of that talent, a bunch of the California talent, Northern California. There's some good football there as well. What I think is probably the most underrated hire, Tavita Pritchard, going from the Washington Commanders in the NFL, he's their quarterbacks coach, to Stanford. Pritchard was a quarterback at Stanford he was the guy right when Jim Harbaugh was there. He was the guy that led right up to Andrew Luck. Andrew Luck, their general manager now. Since his playing days is over, Pritchard spent a ton of time with the Cardinal from really his playing days in 2006 until he got hired with the Commanders in 2022. So, it's been a ton of time with the program. Made the Commanders' offense look really good the past couple of years. Have had their moments this year, but obviously with Jaden Daniels being injured and with the sophomore slump thing, I think it was going to be a tremendous downgrade this year. But I think Pritchard was a great hire. Obviously, the big one from yesterday, Lane Kiffin leaving Ole Miss, going to LSU. Hopefully, Marty Smith has gotten to go home now. We saw him and spent the entire weekend in Oxford hanging out at the facility. I'm not sure exactly what it was, but I mean, man, they cut into that poor guy every commercial break. It seemed like for the whatever game was on ABC or NBC that night. Hey, what's the update on Lane? And talking to the guys on the SEC network, what's the latest on Lane? It's like, guys, I don't know. I think what it was, I can't say this for certain, is he wanted to coach the team in the playoff. He wanted to, see this season out and then go to LSU. And, the athletic director and the president and the chancellor, whatever it is at Ole Miss, said no because they know Lane Kiffin. They know what he did when he left Tennessee. He left him in the middle of the night, took his coaches, took his recruits, took his players, and went to Southern Cal. Now when you can legally transfer and do all this stuff, that's letting him stick around with a playoff contending team that's still relatively young for another couple of weeks to, butter up the coaches, butter up the players, bring them with you to LSU, and then Ole Miss is just completely left in the dumps. So they told him to leave. There was a meeting yesterday between the players and the athletic director and the chancellor, and it went well. They announced Pete Golding as the interim, and they'll ride with Ole Miss football going forward. Looked like some of the offensive staff, Charlie Weiss Jr., obviously, Lane Kiffin, were on that plane to Baton Rouge. He said that, if you wanted a job with me at LSU, you could go. So now LSU is set up with Lane Kiffin as their head coach. Charlie Weiss Jr., one of the better offensive minds in our game right now, the offensive coordinator at LSU. They were able to retain Blake Baker, one of the top, I think, 5 defensive coordinators in the country. And they have $25 to $30 million in NIL money. I mean, I'm not saying it'll be next year, but in 2 years, LSU will probably be in the national championship game now. And if you take all the emotion and feeling out of it, Lane Kiffin's a top 5 coach in college football, and now he has a top 5 job to coincide it. Elsewhere in the SEC, because the SEC is the one seeing the most change this year, Ryan Silverfield going from Memphis to Arkansas. There was a bunch of fake posts about it a couple weeks ago that this was finalized, and now it's come true. For Silverfield, he's got a tough track record to follow with some of the past Memphis coaches, obviously with Norvell and guys like that have, been very successful at Memphis. And I looked over some of these coaches, but they've had some good coaches recently in the past, 30 years, 20 years. Ryan Silverfield, Mike Norvell, Justin Fuente, guys like that. And this is just since 2012. Fuente was doing awesome there at Memphis, got the job at Virginia Tech, and is now currently out of has been out of coaching for a couple of years. Then you look at Mike Norvell. Had a great time at Memphis, goes to Florida State. Has not done very well. Had that one good year. And after that, where do you look? They got Ryan Silverfield, had been with Memphis as your head coach and with the line and stuff like that since 2020 or since 2016. So that seemed like the obvious hire. Now where do they go? For Arkansas, I'm not sure if that was the hire they needed. A lot of fans were not happy with it. to go from a guy like Sam Pittman to a guy like Riley Silverfield, a guy that actually beat Arkansas at Memphis this year, so I think that gives them some promise. Give him some time. He's in the same sort of recruiting sphere now in Arkansas, but also allows him to go a little further west in Oklahoma and Texas, Louisiana. He's in probably one of the hotbeds when it comes to recruiting. I think it became pretty evident as it came down the stretch that obviously it was Bobby Petrino's job. As he got down the stretch, it was looking otherwise because they didn't win a game, and Silverfield's the guy. He beat you this year, so maybe he can fix something. USF, Alex Golish is going to Auburn. Now, as a Tennessee fan, I think this is a great hire. As a guy that was a huge Alex Golish fan when he was at Tennessee, and some of the quarterbacks he's built up over his coaching career, guys like Brock Purdy. I think it's a great hire. But when I'm looking at it from Auburn's point of view, this is a terrible hire. Yeah, his offense is cool and it goes up and down the field and they score a lot of points, but his defense has been terrible at USF, and there are some rumors that maybe Golish is trying to poach some of Tennessee's defensive staff to go with him to Auburn. Tennessee's defense wasn't very good last year either. So if Auburn just wants to be another one of those teams, kind of like Arkansas this year, that puts up a ton of points, turns the ball over a ton, and loses a lot of games, be my guest, because, listen, Golish was the Cinderella early in the season for college football, and immediately after that loss to Miami and a couple other games, kind of fell off the map. And, we're the playoff team for a while and then wasn't. It's kind of difficult to look at the American because, they finished 9-3. But, okay, that's pretty good. They played a couple of ranked teams. Maybe those were the losses. Well, they beat Boise. They beat Florida. You get bounced by Miami. You beat South Carolina State. You beat Charlotte. You destroy North Texas. You destroy FAU, and then you lose a close one to Memphis. And then the next week, you get destroyed by UTSA, and then you lose to Navy. I mean, at that point, you've lost 3 games. Well, they actually beat UTSA. My bad. I read that one backwards. But you lose to Memphis, you lose to Navy, and now your season's over. Your coach is gone. When you look at some of the guys on the team, I mean, Brown's a senior. He's gone. That was 4,000 yards and 40 touchdowns for you right there. Some of your leading receivers will probably follow Golish to Auburn. That's the one that I think was the most risky, along with the next one I'll be talking about with Florida. They hired John Summerall, Tulane's head coach. Summerall's actually going to finish the season with Tulane. They're in the conference championship against North Texas. I believe that one's on Friday night. For a playoff spot, most likely, all things considered. He goes to Florida. I'm not sure if that was the hire Florida wanted to make. Florida wanted to hire like an Alex Golish, like a Ryan Silverfield, somebody that could go up and down the field and score a lot of points, because they've tried to be a defensive team for, you take out those Dan Mullen years. You could say McElwain was an offensive guy, but those defenses had much more talent than the offenses when he was there. Back to when, Urban Meyer left in 2010. When at that point when Will Muschamp had taken over, it was Will Muschamp, defensive guy. Jim McElwain had defensive teams. Now Dan Mullen, great offense, great offensive teams. But then you go to Billy Napier, not great offense. More of a defensive team. So Florida fans wanted more points, so they got a defensive coach. Is that going to help them? I don't know. They've retained a lot of recruits in the portal now, or a lot of recruits in this recruiting cycle. I think that was mostly because of they thought they could get Lane Kiffin. Not sure if any of that has changed since the announcement that he went to LSU, or that he wasn't going to be the Florida guy. But for John Summerall, I think it's a great job upgrade for him. He's a young guy. He's had a couple of the middle of the road jobs with Troy and with Tulane now. Maybe he can turn the Gators around. But Florida and Auburn and Arkansas are going to need to chill out for a year and let these guys get some of their recruits in there. I don't think anybody looks at Silverfield, Golish, or Summerall as above everyone else recruiting. But these are guys going from the American Conference to the SEC. It's going to be a big jump into who they can recruit, who they will recruit, and what these teams are going to look like. One that happened a little bit later on Sunday was Jonathan Smith getting fired from Michigan State and them going out and picking up Pat Fitzgerald. Now, there are some concerns. Obviously, his last couple years at Northwestern weren't good, but that guy's a proven winner in the Big 12, and he was at Northwestern, or the Big 10, and he was at Northwestern for forever and still had a decent record as a head coach. I think that counts for something, and I think it was a good pickup for Michigan State. Also, Mark Stoops was fired by Kentucky, so that brings us into our next topic of what jobs are open now, because we've had a lot of movement. New coaches at Virginia Tech, Colorado State, Oklahoma State, Oregon State, Stanford, LSU, Arkansas, Auburn, Florida, and Michigan State. So what's open? Because out of all those jobs, 2 of them were fired head coaches, and it was James Franklin and Pat Fitzgerald. So let's look at the open jobs. Well, obviously, Jim Mora left, so UConn's open. I think Gordon Samus, their interim, is your best option as their offensive coordinator. The reason their offense has been so good the past couple of years, I think promote him, maybe get a big piece out, of maybe a former 4-star or something like that, falling from a group of 5 or from a Power 5 team. Pick him up, have another good offense. UConn could be right back there. Ole Miss is an interesting one because they seem pretty pumped up about Pete Golding, and it seems like the former Alabama and now former Ole Miss defensive coordinator is maybe getting his first big time head coaching job. We'll see what happens with Ole Miss in the coming weeks, but I think Golding might be a bit young. Because now this Ole Miss job it's a good job. They got talent. They've been able to sort of build some trust when it comes to recruiting. Hopefully Kiffin didn't burn that out for them. But is Pete Golding your guy head coach wise? He's 41 years old, so he's still a young guy. Was at Alabama for a pretty good while, 2018 to 2022. He was the defensive coordinator there. Following the departure of Jeremy Pruitt, and then follows Lane Kiffin to Ole Miss in 2023 to be the defensive coordinator, and now it's promoted to the interim head coach. Now, I think that was the best move for Ole Miss. If you heard in that supposedly no phones recorded audio of that meeting, the guys are pumped up about Pete Golding. So I think that's a good move. Now, if it all goes wrong with Pete Golding, I think you go give Dan Mullen a call. That was a guy that brought your rival to the number 1 team in the country. Mississippi State was the number 1 team in the country for like a month in 2014 when you were having a good year, and I think he actually ended up beating them that year, maybe, in that Egg Bowl. That was a good Egg Bowl, but listen, look what he did with UNLV in a year. If he can fix his recruiting, which is, his high school recruiting, which is something that may not be too big of an impact anymore because now everybody just goes to the portal, I think you give Mullen a call. Now, with Silverfield out, where does Memphis go? I think your first call is over to the Conference USA, and you go give Jerry Mack from Kennesaw State a call. He's a former assistant at Tennessee, has been the head coach at Kennesaw State for 2 years. They were really good this year. And he's got Memphis connections. He's got recruiting ties. He's a Memphis guy. He worked with the staff at one point, I believe. I think that's your go-to guy. Now, this is something that I think Tennessee fans would love to see. Tim Banks, the Tennessee defense coordinator, again, has Memphis ties, and he's been waiting to make that jump to the head coaching ranks. We thought we'd see it last year. Didn't. Thought we'd see it the year before last, him go to MTSU. Didn't happen. Now they want him fired at Tennessee, and if he doesn't get a new head coaching job, it will probably come pretty soon. And funny enough, another former Tennessee guy, Tyson Helton at Western Kentucky. Listen, that offense has been humming, and I still think that Memphis right now is one of the 2 premier jobs when it comes to the group of 5. I think Memphis is up there with the Boise States. I think that's kind of how they're viewed, and with the Tulanes. They're good. Now, USF. They were in a not a great spot when Alex Golesh found them. They had a decent little run with Charlie Strong, and had that that 1 year, I believe it was 2017 or 2018 one, where under Willie Taggart, another Florida State guy, went 11-1. I think that was the year that they had that, or maybe it was 2017. Yes, it was 2017. They had a loss to Houston early in the season, but they had that war on I-4 down in Orlando between UCF, number 13 UCF, and South Florida, and it was an awesome game back and forth. UCF ended up getting the win, and then they beat Texas Tech in the Birmingham Bowl in Charlie Strong's first season, but obviously went downhill pretty quick. And then after Charlie Strong, you bring in Jeff Scott, who hasn't coached since he was at South Florida, and he brought in, funny enough, Charlie Weiss Jr. as his offensive coordinator, and Clint Spencer, former Wake Forest linebacker coach, and as his defensive staff, and it was not good. It went 1-8 the first year, went 2-10 the next year, and then after that, it went 1-11. Scott gets fired. Obviously, Charlie Weiss saw that was going nowhere, and he made his move to the Ole Miss. But then they bring in Alex Golish in 2023, and they go 7-6. And the next year they go 7-6, and the next year, right now they're 9-3, and I would imagine that Golish is probably gone. Kevin Patrick is taking over the interim for their bowl game. They went 9-3, so you're taking a guy that lost went 23-15 over over a 3-year stretch. I mean, I don't know. Where are we at? Yes, South Florida. I think that you look at a guy that had success in that state before, Jimbo Fisher. He wants to get back into coaching. There's some rumbles, and he's not gonna. I just think with how bad the Texas A&M debacle was, that he's gonna have to start somewhere small, kind of like Dan Mullen did with UNLV. Take a USF job. If it doesn't work, spend a couple years there, retire. Go take a desk job with the ACC network, SEC network, whoever wants you. But try it out, because if you get a little second run in you, maybe you could go do something in the last couple of years of your career. Elsewhere, Willie Simmons is the quarterback. He's the head coach at FIU. Listen, FIU had a winning record this year, and it's the first time since 2018 that that's happened. I think they got themselves a football team, and I think that more importantly, they have themselves a football coach. They had kind of shuffled through guys for a while. It had been a couple years of Mike McIntyre, but this year, with the first year of Willie Simmons, it had come from Duke, had been at Florida A&M, Prairie View A&M, Alcorn State, so it had been in the, that HBCU kind of conference. And now, listen, FIU, they weren't top of the Conference USA, but they finished 5th behind some really good teams like Kennesaw State, Western Kentucky, and Jacksonville State. I think they did a really good job with their team this year. And you look at some of their losses. UConn was really good this year. Penn State was really good this year. Delaware finished slow, but they were a pretty good team early in the year. Then you lose to Kennesaw and Missouri State. These are just the teams that finished ahead of you in the conference. So they're playing up to their potential, maybe a little higher. I think Simons is a good guy for a job in that area. Tulane. I think right now it is probably 1-1 when it comes to group of 5 jobs. Listen, Bob Chesney at JMU has not left yet. I think maybe he could do a similar move to what we saw with John Summerall, their last head coach, and maybe not take the full step, the full jump from the Sun Belt or the Conference USA all the way up to the SEC. Maybe stop in the middle, coach a team in the American for a little bit, see if you can handle it, and then go on. Miami offensive coordinator Shannon Dawson. He's a guy that, listen, Miami's offense had its ups and downs this year. I think we can all agree, but they also had Carson Beck as a quarterback, so I think you can take that into consideration. But I mean, when you look at points scored, they were one of the, were they second in their conference behind only Pitt and Duke. Duke scored a lot of points this year in conference play, but then you look outside of conference play, we're second behind or third behind Pitt and Duke. So you have one of the brighter minds, at least in the ACC, when it comes to offensive coordinators, in Shannon Dawson. And look, he is 48 years old and hasn't been a head coach yet. He spent some time at Houston. He spent some time at Southern Miss, at Kentucky, West Virginia, teams like that. I think he's ready to get his first head coaching job. He's from Louisiana. I mean, I think that one's kind of staring you in the face. And we see what Miami's done recruiting-wise. I think he can bring some of that portal-level recruiting to Tulane and make them a contender every year for the playoff. And, they could just become that sort of AAA team if we want to take it into baseball, that's just always pumping guys to the majors. It's just always pumping coaches up to the Power 5 level, Power 4 level. Now, a job that has been open for one of the longer times and has yet to be filled, and really hasn't had much chatter about it. Penn State. Now, it started off Kurt Signetti. He said no. Marcus Freeman allegedly has said no. Matt Rule has said no. Obviously, Drinkwitz and Clark Lee and guys like that signing extensions proves that they've said no. So where do you go? I think Bob Chesney is obviously on your radar. Kalani Satake at BYU, there's some serious talks of him being the guy. I think if you're Penn State, you're cheering for Texas Tech this weekend, so you can go ahead and try to hire Satake away from BYU. And I don't know if this is just the side of Twitter I'm on or X, but I've seen Josh Heupel's name in there a lot recently, ever since Saturday. As a Tennessee fan, I think that would be a terrible idea for Danny White to let Josh Heupel go in a year where we've seen, if you want to put it one way, we've seen Danny White let Tony Vitello walk. I don't think we need to let that happen with our football coach because realistically, yeah, they went 8-4 this year and it may not be great, but he's the best Tennessee football coach that they've had since Fulmer. Lane may have built some consistency here, but it was never going to happen with the other three guys. But I think could be a potential good hire for Penn State because that would put them right back pretty much where they are, because I think you can look at Josh Heupel as a sort of on the level that you looked at James Franklin, maybe a little bit higher than you looked at James Franklin when he was at Vanderbilt. And maybe that would set Penn State up a little nicer for the future, but again, not exactly sure there. Now, Kentucky, the one that opened up last night, well, we've already seen a fake account say Will Stein, the Oregon offensive coordinator. I think that's probably the favorite for the job, but I think you got to look at Brian Hartline, the OC from Ohio State. He's got some connections to the Kentucky area. I think his brother, his brother played quarterback at Kentucky, so maybe there's a connection there. And I mean, listen, that would take Kentucky from, if they got either of these guys, from a bottom feeder in the SEC if they can retain Cutter Boley and some of those running backs. I think some of them are seniors, but nonetheless, they can retain some guys, bring some guys in from Ohio State or Oregon to Kentucky. I mean, Kentucky immediately becomes better than probably they ever were with Stoops. They had that one, a couple of good years in the late 2010s, but that brings Kentucky up to a contending level, and then the SEC just keeps getting better and better with coaches. So now that we're finished with the regular season, I want to take a quick look at maybe what were some of the best games from the season. I want to do the first 7 weeks of the regular season. Today we'll do weeks 1 through 7 today, and weeks 8 through 14 we'll do them on Friday. But at the end of the season, you always look back and reflect, and you're sad because the season's over. Good seasons or not, even in 2011 to 2014 as a Tennessee fan, I was still sad to see the season go. Yeah, we would lose half our games, but they were fun. So I wanted to go back through each of the weeks and look at some of the big games from the weeks and which one were probably the best. Week 1, there's a lot of good ones. You could look at the Alabama-Florida State game. I think that one was a little bit too out of hand. A 2-touchdown lead, but LSU-Clemson, that one was down to the wire the entire night, and really one play made the difference. Or Miami-Notre Dame, that one was another one that went right down to the wire, and it was the last-second drive by Miami that ended up winning them the football game. Now to week 2, Mississippi State, Arizona State, that was a great game. We saw Blake Shapen have a huge game, that big pitch and catch to Brennan Thompson for the touchdown. Sam Leavitt looked completely lost. Arizona State was down, 24-3 at one point. It may have been 21-0, 24-0, but they came back. Actually, I believe it was 17-3. And then, obviously, Mississippi State scored that touchdown, got the pick at the end of the game. Leavitt was not good. That Mississippi State's defense was awesome, and they got so close to a bowl game this year. And, it's unfortunate that they didn't make it, especially when you start 4-0. But the SEC's tough, man. And if you can't win more than one game in conference, you're not going to go to a bowl game. You have to win 2 conference games. That's pretty much what it is. And you look at the teams that won 2 conference games, well, none of them are bowling either because they struggled out of conference. Kentucky with their game against Louisville, Florida with South Florida, and Miami. Week 2, speaking of Florida, they have a loss to South Florida, that 18-16 one. Great game. Yeah, just an all-around awesome game. Really from top to bottom, and it kind of puts you on notice for one, that Florida was going to be rough this year, and two, well, it kind of brought up two questions. One, how good is South Florida? Two, how bad is Florida? Well, we saw that South Florida was pretty good, and we saw that Florida was really bad. So realistically, if they played this game again this week, I would probably take out the Florida State game. If they were going to play that game last week, I would pick South Florida. Week 3, there's two great ones. The best game of the week, Texas A&M taking down Notre Dame 41-40. A Tyler Buckner botched hold, cost Notre Dame a game. And, you look maybe down the line a little bit, is that going to keep Notre Dame out of the playoff? That just a simple missed hold in week 3, or a simple, your defense not being in the right spot there at the end of the game against Miami, is that going to keep you out of the playoff? Because, if the right stuff happens on conference championship weekend, it will. I also think you look at that Georgia-Tennessee game. Georgia winning 44-41 in overtime. Tennessee was, like a 38 or a 42-yard field goal away from winning that game straight up. And, how much does that change the trajectory of either of these team seasons? Because Georgia, I think, gained that fourth quarter killer mentality sort of in this game. And then, you look, they probably still lose to Alabama in 2 weeks after that, but, do they hold on and beat Auburn? Do they come back and beat Ole Miss? This is a Georgia team that got very close in a lot of games this year. Now, down the stretch, they've looked like one of the 2 or 3 best teams in the country, but at that point, they were really shaky. And how much does that win, if that outcome has changed for both of those games, how much does it change the outcome of the season? Does A&M go 8-4 again? Because they probably lose that South Carolina game. They still lose that Texas game. They probably lose, to Missouri or something. Obviously, I don't think Notre Dame loses again. I think that their schedule was easy enough. Week 3 could turn out to be one of the more pivotal weeks in all of college football when it comes down to the end. Week 4 was kind of a crappy week. There were some possibly big games that ended up not being that great. But you had number 11 Oklahoma taking down number 24 Auburn 24-17. You have the missed pass and interference on Cam Coleman, the missed sneaking the receiver on the field against Oklahoma. It was kind of when that narrative started with, is Auburn getting screwed by the SEC refs? And then that may have been the case. Now, the next week, you got Alabama taking down Georgia 24-21. That was a great game. Alabama didn't score in the second half, and they didn't need to. Not much of any scoring in the second half in this one, really. Also think that week, I think that Illinois-USC game is going to be tremendously underrated when you look back at things. Illinois kind of controlled it for most of the game. USC able to come back and take the lead late, and then Illinois drives down the field. You got an in-state kid knocking a field goal for a ranked win at home, and that may be the highlight of Illinois' season right there. Now, the next week, I also think you could throw that Penn State Oregon game in there as well. It was a great game, but those two felt a little bigger to me. But the next week, I'll include Penn State because that's when they lose to UCLA 42-37, one of the more shocking games of the year. I mean, UCLA, at that point going into the game, we were having serious talks on here and on other shows on the X Sports Network that, is UCLA going to win a game? I mean, they're losing to Mountain West teams. They're losing to non-Power 5 teams at home, They get that win against number 7 Penn State. They went on a little stretch, rattling off some wins before they kind of came back to reality. Florida took down Texas that week, and still one of the more confusing games of the season. Texas was still pretty highly ranked at that time, and this is when the skepticism against Texas got real. The run game was bad in that one. Their pass game was bad in that one. It's just not good. And now for Week 7, this was the third Saturday in October. Indiana taking down Oregon 30-20. That was a great game. Actually, I believe Week 8 was the third Saturday in October, so we'll have that one on the next episode. But Week 7, you have the Indiana over Oregon. That was a great game, and those are two of the best teams in the country. both will probably, they might end up playing in the playoff when it comes down to it. And then number 18, BYU taking out Arizona 33-27 in double overtime. How much does that game change things in the Big 12? Because you look right now at the Big 12 standings, if I can pull those up, Arizona is sitting there at 6-3 at 9-3 overall. You flip that game, just that game against BYU. Well, now it is Texas Tech and Arizona, or Texas Tech and, did Arizona and Utah play? They did not. But yeah, it would be Arizona. Actually, at that point, it might be Texas Tech and Houston again for the Big 12 championship. But that was a great game. BYU earned it and they won it, and now, Saturday they'll be playing for a chance to go to the playoff. Now, turn a little bit to do something a little earlier in the week than we're used to because of all the basketball we're going to talk about on Wednesday. Heisman finalists, who I believe the Final Four should be. There's always 3 or 4 that they send to New York. I think it should be 4 this year. Listen, right now, I think that Diego Pavia Saturday won the Heisman. I think he is 1-1. The only thing that could change that is what one of the next 2 guys does if they vote before. Let me look that up. If they vote before or after conference championship game. So it will happen after. So Heisman ballots are sent to voters on Monday of the championship week. So today. But the deadline to vote is Monday after the games are played. How many of those guys will vote before the game, after the game? If they vote before the game, I think Pavia's got it won. If they vote after the game, I think you'll look at Mendoza or Sayin. If one of them has a huge game, that one of them probably wins it because I have them at 2 and 3 right now. Pretty interchangeable. 4, I got Jeremiah Love. He got hurt Saturday in that game at Stanford. I think he would have had a better game if he didn't get hurt. But I think he's earned it. That dude has been awesome this season. One of the better running backs in the country for one of the better teams in the country. And listen, you take Notre Dame and Jeremiah Love and you separate them. You put Jeremiah Love on some other team in some other country and you give Notre Dame some other running back or just let them use Jadarian Price. I think both of them struggle. I really do. I don't think Notre Dame is very good without Jeremiah Love, and I don't think Jeremiah Love is tremendous without Notre Dame. So that's what I think. What are the odd makers saying? Well, right now at DraftKings, they have the exact same top 4. Slightly different order. They have Mendoza and Sayin at 1 and 2, and then Pavia at 3, Love at 4. I think that's your 4 guys. Just on the outside, I think Jeremiah Smith sitting out that game against Rutgers. While there may have been some health concerns there, you wanted to rest up for the Michigan game, whatever it was, I think that may have hurt your odds big time because now you're a receiver, a position that's already a bit at a disadvantage when it comes to the Heisman, and now you're missing a game when you weren't tremendous in a couple of your early games. Gunnar Stockton at Georgia, again, I think if he had a better game Saturday, he might be in that top 4. He might have replaced Jeremiah Love because, again, Love didn't play great on Saturday, but I think had better numbers before that going in. Ty Simpson also still around there, the quarterback for Alabama. Slowed down. Their offense isn't putting up 50 points a game like some teams are. And Jacob Rodriguez from Texas Tech, the linebacker's in there. He's forced a ton of turnovers. It's a great story, but again, it was gonna take a lot to get him to New York. And then a fun little stat to leave you with: 12 of the AP preseason top 25 finished its regular season unranked. Number 2 Penn State finished 6-6. Number 4 Clemson at 7-5, as well as number 9 LSU. Arizona State and Illinois 11-12 in the preseason, both finished 8-4. I'm not going to take a bunch of the negative hate on some of these 8-4 teams because in a lot of years 8-4 has been good enough to keep you ranked. South Carolina and Florida though at 13-15 both went 4-8. I think if you asked anybody with a sense of common, just a sliver of common sense in the SEC, if they thought Florida or South Carolina deserved to be ranked in the top 15, everyone outside of Columbia and Gainesville would have said no. Why are you ranking them? They're not going to be that good, and they weren't. SMU at 16 was 8-4. Kansas State, boy, they had a rough start to the season. Lucky they finished at 500 and still get a bowl game and have a chance to finish above 500. But boy, 6-6, a rough year for Kansas State. Iowa State finished 8-4. Again, you have the 2 teams that played in Dublin combined for 14-10. That's an average of 7-5. I don't think if you're one of those teams or some of the teams that could be going over there next year, you want to go. And then again, 22, 24, and 25, Iowa State, Tennessee, and Boise State all finished 8-4. So yeah, there's usually about 10 or 12 every year that start the season in the top 25 and don't finish there. And when you look at some of the preseason polls, yeah, I think that some of these, you could foresee most of those teams happening. College basketball for today, not a whole lot of big games. Again, still coming back from Feast Week. I think you're actually going to get the start of the ACC-SEC Challenge on Tuesday, I believe. Temple and Villanova play in the Big 5 Classic at 5:30. And then again on Tuesday, you get Tennessee heading up to Syracuse for the SEC-ACC Men's Challenge. Florida going to Duke, Iowa, and Michigan State getting Big Ten play started, as are Purdue and Rutgers, UConn and Kansas, North Carolina and Kentucky in that ACC-SEC Men's Challenge, and then USC, Oregon. Probably some other games outside the top 25. I'll take a look at the rest of that challenge real quick here. Pull up the SEC. Go to tomorrow. Okay, so the games tomorrow in this challenge on the men's side. Number 13 Tennessee at Syracuse, Oklahoma at Wake Forest, A&M at Pitt, Virginia Tech at South Carolina, Florida at Duke, Georgia at Florida State, Miami at Ole Miss, Missouri at Notre Dame, and UNC at Kentucky. On Wednesday, not as many games, but you got Clemson at Alabama, Arkansas hosting Louisville, LSU at Boston College, Mississippi State at Georgia Tech, NC State at Auburn. That should be a fun one. Will Wade and Stephen Pearl. SMU and Vandy, two undefeated teams that are looking really good, and then Virginia and Texas. Again, I mentioned some of those other games going on. Big Ten play is starting. You got UConn and Kansas. That's a great game. So yeah, a ton of great basketball going on. We'll preview Wednesday's games on the show Wednesday, and we'll get you through Wednesday and Thursday. So Wednesday is going to be strictly college basketball. We're going to recap the entirety of Feast Week from last week. We had one episode, so I don't think we really gave some of those teams the time that they deserved. We'll look at the new AP Top 25 for men's and women's. They come out today, but obviously don't exactly have the time for it on this episode, so we'll talk about it on Wednesday. We'll talk about the new playoff rankings, what that could mean. There's a ton of stuff, and then we'll Friday we'll preview college basketball for the weekend. We'll do conference championship games. Ton of stuff. It's super exciting. But that will do it for this episode of the Mark My Words College Sports Show here on the X Sports Network. We'll be back Wednesday around 11:30. So until then, have a good day, everybody.
Going the distance with local sports. This is the X Sports Network.